Hello and welcome to the Luv Doc podcast.
Okay, are we recording? Ready to dive in?
Ready when you are.
Let's do it. Welcome in, everyone. You know, it's funny how the Luv Doc always seem to dig up the juiciest dilemmas, and today's deep dive is no exception. We're wading right into the thick of it. Relationships, trust, and those oh-so-blurry lines we're all navigating in this digital age.
I think a lot of people are going to relate to this one, too.
Oh, for sure. The Luv Doc, always a good time, throws us right into the deep end with a newlywed who stumbles upon their spouse, wait for it, DMing multiple exes.
Yeah, that's going to raise some eyebrows.
Right. And not just a casual happy birthday on one platform, but across multiple platforms, almost like they're trying to keep it hush-hush.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What's the motivation for keeping those conversations under wraps?
It's definitely sus. It makes me think about that phrase the letter writer used, emotional affair. I mean, wow, they're already framing it as a transgression.
It's interesting, right? Because it immediately throws us into this gray area. Where does a digital interaction cross the line into betrayal? Is it even possible if it never leaves the virtual world?
Exactly. And what about intent? Like the Luv Doc points out, we don't actually know the content of these DMs. Could be completely innocent catching up, right? Or maybe not.
That's the million-dollar clarion, isn't it? And it's what makes it so complicated. But I will say, the Luv Doc makes a good point about how important it is for couples to have those outside voices.
I was going to say the same thing. We can't expect our partners to be our everything, our confidants for absolutely everything, can we?
Right. We need those other connections, those friendships and support systems to be healthy individuals and, by extension, healthy partners too.
Yeah.
And this is where things get a little stickier.
Yeah, I can see where you're going with this.
It's the choice of confidant here, isn't it? Those exes, they just come preloaded with a whole lot of history and baggage. And then you add on the secrecy element. It's like throwing gasoline on a spark, isn't it?
Totally. It really highlights how what one person sees as harmless venting can feel like a huge betrayal to the other.
We all have those different perceptions, right?
Yeah.
Different experiences that shape how we view these kinds of situations.
Absolutely. And that's where things get so interesting. Because it's not always about right or wrong. It's about understanding those individual perspectives within the context of a relationship.
So true. And speaking of individual perspectives, this whole situation really got me thinking about attachment styles.
So true. And speaking of individual perspectives, this whole situation really got me thinking about attachment style.
Yeah, attachment styles. That's such a good point. It's actually a big part of why I find this whole thing so fascinating.
Yeah.
Because how we handle relationships, both romantic and platonic, is often like really influenced by our past experiences, you know?
Okay, yes. Attachment styles. I always hear about those, but I'll be honest, I need a little refresher. Could you break it down for us a bit? Like, how would different attachment styles view this whole DMing the exes thing?
Totally. So let's imagine someone with an anxious attachment style for a second.
Okay.
They tend to really crave closeness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they could be maybe a little more sensitive to anything that feels like a threat to the relationship.
Okay, that makes sense.
So in this scenario, if they stumbled upon their partner secretly messaging exes, it would probably trigger a lot of anxiety, a lot of insecurity.
Yeah, I can see that.
They might jump to conclusions, assume the worst, maybe even work themselves up thinking, oh my God, is this the beginning of the end? You know, those kinds of thoughts.
Right. Makes sense. What about someone on the opposite end of that spectrum, someone with more of an avoidant attachment style?
Okay, so someone with an avoidant attachment style, they really value their independence, like a lot. And they might actually feel a bit suffocated by too much closeness.
Okay.
So they might look at the letter writer's reaction and be like, whoa, hold on, this seems a little dramatic.
Really?
Yeah, because to them, a little digital distance might not seem like that big of a deal. It all goes back to those individual needs and those ingrained patterns we bring into relationships.
So you could have two people reacting in totally different ways to the same situation, and neither one is necessarily right or wrong. They just experience relationships differently.
Exactly. And honestly, that's why trying to slap a label on it, like saying it's cheating or not cheating, kind of misses the point.
It's way more nuanced than that.
Right. It's not about some kind of universal judgment. What matters is the impact of those actions. How do they affect the relationship itself? How do they affect each person within that relationship? Those are the important questions.
That makes a lot of sense. You know, this reminds me of that part in the Luv Doc. They talk about how couples need outside outlets to avoid getting, and I love how they phrase this, too creepy.
Oh, yeah. It's funny, but they're really onto something there.
Like, they say it kind of jokingly, but it's so true.
Maintaining a sense of self within the relationship, having your own friends, your own hobbies, those are all really crucial.
Absolutely. It's all about finding that balance, right? You need your person, but you also need yourself. But I guess the big difference here, at least in this particular situation, is that the spouse, the Luv Doc, is confiding in exes, not just like going bowling with their buddies or something.
Yeah, that's a good point. And honestly, that's where all those other factors come into play and make this situation so tricky to navigate.
Right. It's not just the outside voice. It's the history, the baggage.
Exactly. It's the combination of the confidant being an ex, the secrecy surrounding those interactions, the past they share. Mm-hmm. It all adds these layers of complexity that can be really tough to untangle.
It is complicated. So where do we even go from here? Like, what are some takeaways for our listeners who might be dealing with similar questions in their own relationships?
I think it really boils down to communication and, honestly, a good dose of self-awareness, too. It's not about pointing fingers or, playing the blame game.
Right.
It's about figuring out what those underlying needs are in the relationship and finding healthier ways to actually meet them.
Okay, so instead of just like stewing about these late night DMs, the letter writer and really anyone in this situation should be focusing on how to talk to their partner about the root of the issue.
Yes, exactly.
Like, what's really going on beneath the surface here?
100%. Ask yourself, am I feeling neglected? Is there a lack of emotional intimacy in my relationship? Those kinds of questions.
Yeah.
Are there needs that I haven't been communicating effectively, maybe even unconsciously?
Oh, that's a good point.
And then, most importantly, having that conversation with your partner about what you discovered and why it's brought up these feelings for you.
So it's about, like you said, shifting from accusation to understanding, right? And maybe using this as an opportunity to look inward a bit, too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, it requires us to examine our own baggage, our own insecurities, maybe even, like we were talking about earlier, our own attachment styles.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive. The Luv Doc was definitely entertaining, but having you here to kind of unpack the psychology behind it all, well, that's what takes this from interesting to really insightful.
Well, thank you. It's these nuanced conversations about relationships in our digital age that I just find so fascinating.
Me too.
And this whole situation, right? The exes, the secrecy, the way our individual perceptions come into play, I think it really drives home how important it is for couples to define those boundaries together.
Yeah.
And to communicate their needs openly and honestly.
It's so important, right? Because what might feel like a harmless catch-up to one person could feel like a huge betrayal to another. There's just no one-size-fits-all answer, is there?
Exactly. And that's why, open and honest and compassionate communication is just so essential. Yeah. It's how we navigate all the complexities that come with relationships, especially in this ever-evolving digital world.
Absolutely. And on that note, I think we'll leave our listeners with this. The next time you find yourself questioning someone's digital footprint, or even your own ode achievement, maybe ask yourself, what's the conversation I'm not having?
Ooh, I like that.
Something to think about, right?
Definitely.
Until next time.
To read the column that spawned this podcast, go to austinchronicle.com/columns/the Luv Doc. There are probably worse things to do with your time, right?